Hello, good evening. My question might be directed to YB Wong Chen. It's about trade pacts or trade issues. We are talking about TPPA recently, but then there's another two major trade pacts that is well under discussion under Datuk Mustafa Muhammad's purview, which is firstly the Free Trade Area of the Asia Pacific or AFTA, which is heavily backed by China. And also the other one is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP. So these two major trade pacts are almost like equivalents of TPPA. And as you mentioned just now, that under TPPA we are actually chartering into dark waters. And what is your opinion with these other two major coming trade pacts, which also, you know, we are actually, Malaysia is stuck between, are we stuck between choosing two sides of the world superpowers between US and China?
Yeah, alright, hi, my name is Daniel. So my question is for the panel actually. So I think, we kind of agree that, Malaysia has been in the same political system regime for the longest time, and that has come with so many structural flaws, and they've compounded itself. And I think a lot of what we see today, personally, is there's a lot of apathy within the system. You don't trust the system, right? And I think it's a big flaw. And promising a regime change is one thing, but that does not necessarily come with the structural change that I think the country needs, because we've seen it rot, or not rot, but erode over the last how many decades and so on and so forth. So what is PKR's position on this? Do you think it's enough for the party to come in and change, or the opposition to come in and change without, or how far does that extend to the structural changes that are necessary?
Okay, is it possible to take two there?
Hi, my question is to Rafizi. I'd like to know, because right now most of the corruption and abuse of power is because of there's no clear separation of powers. So if PKR or like Pakatan Harapan will be the government, so what will you do to minimize this?
Hello, hi, my name is Haris Reza. Firstly, I would like to agree with Nick Nazmi for stating that Malaysia is a classical case of stability is destabilizing in an economy or political. But my question is more to Ms. Rafizi's comment on, we are at a junction of rewriting the future generation of Malaysia. So what I see is that the major problem that's we face in Malaysia right now is the ethical breakdown in our leadership. So what will be the position of PKR or this leadership for the coming years that to address the problem in younger generation, because they will be the future leaders, and if we don't tell them or give them tools to manage these ethical breakdowns that they soon face when they go into power, will this be a main agenda in their future planning soon? All right.
Shall we start? Okay, let me address the issue of trade. We are a trading nation. Malaysia produces much more goods than we consume ourselves, so therefore we need to trade. Yeah. Now, the basis of Malaysia's problem is this: we trade in commodities. In the 80s and the early 90s, we looked like we're going to industrialize under Dr. Mahathir. We have regressed back because China just became the big factory. So we lost out, so we actually had a premature deindustrialization in the process, resulting in the fact that we are heavily dependent on commodities, which is palm oil, oil and gas, rubber, timber, and we'll come back to that. So the Malaysian trade issue is not about who we trade with, it's not about RCEP, or it's not about TPPA, it's that we need to fix our structural problem in the economic system, which is to go back to some sort of industrialization program with some services at hand. Yeah? Now, I don't think that if we sign RCEP is technically a voluntary scheme system. It's non-binding. There's some sort of it's not a binding agreement, but it's slowly merging and turning into a bit of a TPPA. terms on investor-state dispute settlement. These are a bit technical issues, but they are being included inside the ASEP issue, and they're being forced on us to sign. This is the problem. If we sign the TPPA, which we will sign in February, then the Chinese will demand that you sign ASEP. If not, China will lose face over the matter, because TPPA has been announced by Americans as a pivot to Asia program, which is to stop the rise of China in the region. So it is almost a foregone conclusion that we have to sign ASEP. Yeah? So if we take over government, I mean that's the scenario here today, right? We're talking about what if we rule. We will most likely sign ASEP also. But we will need to buy time, and we need to restructure the economic system for at least 10 years and see how we can use our comparative advantages as a commodity producer. That's why we are leading in oil palm, we're leading in rubber, we're leading in timber. How do we then go up the maximum value chain? And then we look at it from the point of how do we trade these items up. Yeah? And there's no point talking about open free trade when, on software when we produce nothing. Or, you know, all sort of silly things out there, biotechnology, whatever, we don't even have those capability. So there's no real point of talking about opening up the entire economy to trade. Yeah? As I said, we just need to focus on a few good, solid industries that we need to back. And as the government, I'm not a true believer of free market like Raf. I would like to see government trying to use somewhere close to 1 million students coming out into the working environment. How do we put the best of our students into our key industries? Yeah? Say we take 50% and put it into the 5 key industries that we want to support, and then the other 50% allow them to pursue what they want. So we need to manage this kind of thing. As a small country, we need to always plan ahead and strategize. Now, just wrapping up on that, so I hope I answered your ASEP question. Now, structural changes, yes, I mean that's the most important thing. That's the reason why we're all in politics. Raf, Nick and I, we want to see structural changes, and we don't want to stay too long in power. There's no point in doing that. There's no point going for, trying to stay in power for 2 terms or 3 terms or whatever it is. We just need to get it all done. And the major structural change we need to do is open up the media, so that the media then becomes the fourth estate and try to do the bit for us, where they try to check and balance on behalf of the society. Other structural changes is taxation, because you need to have a stable government that has finances to pursue national strategic interests. So taxation is very clear. Malaysian corporations pay double the amount of tax that the 11 million workers in Malaysia. This is completely the upside down, right? In Australia and in UK, people pay more tax than the corporations. So what you have in Malaysia is corporations making tremendous amount of money. I should know, I used to be a corporate lawyer. and it's just wrong. It's just something fundamentally wrong with the Malaysian taxation system. And as Raf pointed out earlier, if we don't address the issue where we pay people more, where the personal income tax overtakes corporate tax, there's no point implementing GST as well, because there's no trade-off. Yeah? So if we focus on those few issues, we should systemically change the way the country runs in terms of money, in terms of government having sufficient money to pursue good public policy. Yeah? Okay, that's it.
Let me attempt to answer the second, third, and fourth questions at one go, because I think they are so interrelated. Actually, they are the same questions. Daniel asked about structural changes. I get the sense that you feel that whatever is in public discourse now is not substantial enough or substantive enough. And then gentleman just now asked about how do you tackle corruption, separation of power, and so on. And Harry, the fourth one, young people and the ethical breakdown I'm actually quite optimistic that it is actually not an impossible job. I mean, we are really screwed through, but we actually have a good basis. It's not as if that we are Rwanda. It's not, you know. It's just that there are so many things which are common sense, which could have been done very easily, which over the years, because of the corruption and abuses of power, suddenly common sense become not so common in Malaysia. For example, we must start with having the right people doing the right thing. Yeah? That means that you must have, for a start, having a competent, intelligent, honest, and God-fearing people in a position of power, because only people like this can follow through a national agenda and see it through. You must begin with that even before you start talking about structural change or anything. Because you can come up with any new constitution, you can do any changes, but if you don't have the right person with the right attitude, with the right honesty, and really God-fearing, then you will end up like Thailand. Every 2-3 years they will rewrite their constitution, but because it's the same people over and over again, all those structural changes never materialize into the long-lasting changes they want in society. So that's very important. We need to get the right people. If you want to make somebody a minister of finance, you don't get Ahmad Maslan, get someone else, for example. It's common sense. It's extremely common. It's something that we shouldn't even be talking here. If you want to appoint somebody to tabung haji to save it from its perhaps what would be a possible financial calamity, Bank Negara governor wrote specific recommendation, appoint someone with deep experience in investment. Who did they appoint? They appointed AG. No experience whatsoever in finance and investment and so on. So you must begin with this, and that can only happen when the leadership that takes over has the political will to set aside all the vested interests and appoint the people who are really qualified. And that is where, if we need to appoint a non-Malay as a vice chancellor in the university, you do that. As simple as that. Because whether it's a non-Malay, whether it's a British, if they are honest, competent, and they know this is what they have to do, they will deliver it. And who will benefit? The society will benefit. You know, why are we so fearful that having someone at the top, doing certain things, will alter the whole society? It doesn't work like that. Because at the end of the day, the buck stops with the political leadership. If you have a political leadership who is honest and say that I need this guy to deliver this job, you do that. So that is the first process. And I think after that, I'm not that much more concerned about so-called structural changes, because we know what needs to be done. I mean, in terms of our judiciary, it's actually quite advanced. It used to be very respectable. What happened is, somebody screwed up. Don't change the system, or don't change a car because the driver cannot drive. You just throw away the driver. I don't see, in terms of government system, I don't actually see many big structural issues. In terms of judiciary, for example, the only things perhaps that we really need to sort out is the overlapping issue about the Sharia and civil courts. Because what happens now, there are cases of unilateral conversion which cannot be heard in either. So there are a section of community which is totally denied justice or to be heard. So there are a few glitches of administrative changes that we do. But in terms of structure, to the executive and judiciary, I don't think it's too big an issue. Of course, we have to really push forward the parliamentary reform. If there is any big structural change to our government system, it would be most probably parliamentary system, the House, the legislative branch, because as it is now, it's really rubber stamp and it's really useless. You know, the biggest torture to be an MP is to sit down there and have to listen to all these speeches of Bung Mokhtar and the gang for one whole day. It's really the biggest torture. Our parliament does not amount to anything. It's just shock sendiri. MPs go there and love to hear themselves speak. It doesn't have any impact whatsoever. It doesn't have the muscle and teeth to keep the executive branch accountable. So we really have to push forward all the parliamentary reform, have a committee system, give the check and balance power to the committee, so that I envision, if we take power, people actually will think twice about being a minister. Because it's too much job, you are under scrutiny all the time, you know, and everyone scream at you, because it is more powerful to be the chairman of the House Committee on Finance, because I will screw you if you take 10 cents. That's how it works. Then the executive will fear the parliament, and then the MPs can really do their work because they can do their check and balance, just like how it works in the UK and in the Senate and so on and so forth. So very quickly on the other two, corruption and ethical breakdown. In terms of corruption, I think there are certain processes and practices that we really have to eliminate on the day, on the hour we take power. For example, direct award without negotiation of contracts. Unfortunately, over the last 5 years, ever since Najib became Prime Minister, almost all of the major contracts were all awarded through direct negotiation under the disguise of privatization. There is a unit called Unit Kerjasama Awam Swasta on the pretext of public-private partnership, which basically award tenders directly to cronies. And we end up paying for 50, 60, 70 years in the future because concessions has been signed. And what disgusts me most is that government will, through the back door, then fund these projects. So it's not even a privatization project. It's just basically Nik Nazmi getting a 2 billion project fully funded by government, and he just appoints somebody to go and do it, and we go to, I don't know, anywhere and have holidays. That happens every day now. So if you immediately, you know, at the stroke of a pen, stop that, I think a lot of the problems, a lot of the big corruptions that we are worried about, we solve that. All these problems, NFC scandal, all these are direct award, you know. What do you want? I give you a cow project, now take 250 million, you do whatever you like. That has to stop. And that, as I said just now, with the 80-20 rule, basically that, the 20% usually committed the 80% corruption. You stop that, I think you solve almost the majority of the 80%. Then I think you have to start putting in the painful processes at the civil servants, at the agency level, and this will take a long time because you have to change the system, you have to review all the percolating and the manner things are done, procurement, and that will take some time. The good thing is we do have a lot of good successes. You know, some of our GLs is I used to be in Petronas. Whatever you say about Petronas, the system is globally recognized. It's global system. So the system is good, you know. So we can basically apply some of the system that had already worked, and then we have to roll out to the government. And then finally it comes to Hari's questions, what about the ethics? Because as I said just now, you can do whatever system, whatever structure change, but if you don't have the right, honest, upright people to manage, we're still in trouble. This is I think I would like to believe that our society, Malaysians as a whole, actually despise corruption, despise everything that happens. It's just that over these years, we just have to live with it for a number of reasons. Some of the Malays feel that there's no other choice anyway. So, why complain because we don't have any options? For some years, the non-Malays feel the same way. They feel that perhaps the only realistic government who can govern is just the end. So that's why we live with that system, with that ethical breakdown, although I think the majority of our society actually reject it. So I don't think it's a very difficult task to really clean up and make sure that there is a good ethical foundation, especially among the young ones when you take over. In fact, it is easier with the young ones. And I think it has to begin with people like you guys here, because you are the ones who will go back and will take the mantle of leadership in the corporate and government. If from the very beginning you understand the value of uprightness, honesty, and so on, is the people like you who, once you are put into a properly constituted, corruption-proof system, then I think the system works. What is the problem so far is that our success model of the last 20 years is very much materialistic in nature. And what is worse, to me, and I'm sorry if I'm quite harsh with a lot of you, to me, the most privileged of our society is the worst when it comes to honesty and values. It's the people like you who actually have the privilege to come overseas scholarship, because when you go back, you don't think about value, you think about going up. First you follow minister as special officer, and then you want to be CEO, and so on and so forth. Arul Kanda was just like you during my generation, 15, 16 years back. That's reality, So, if I think we continue to push the question, the issue of uprightness and honesty and so on, even if there is no specific program that government does, I think you cannot stop it. It's just human nature that society hates corruption. That's all. So eventually, through the advent of information and Facebook and social media, it is the demand from the grassroots that will require upright leaders. And if someone is known to be corrupt, I think the public will throw them out. So a lot of this actually will take place by itself. So I want to conclude like this. You may think that the task is so humongous, Where do you begin? Everywhere is problematic, it has to be fixed. But history has shown other countries which were worse than us actually managed to put it through. Korea in 1951 went through a disastrous war. Millions of people died killing each other. In 1951, Seoul is nothing like Kuala Lumpur. Seoul is just a very small town. If you go to Busan and all this, not that I went up, I watch and I read, it's hardly anything in 1951. They went through hell, literally. But there are certain things about these societies which managed to put it through. There are values, they put a premium on honesty, they put premium on hard work, they put premium on getting the right people, doing the right thing, that eventually, even though in the first 25 years of Korea progress after war, they were all governed by dictators. After 25 years, the system collapsed by itself because society that puts value to all that will pull down dictators by themselves. And once that happens, within a space of 20 years, you see Korea to be what it is today, when in 1981, in terms of GDP and growth and per capita income. South Korea is at farthest. So have that imagination. If other people have done it and they had to survive even worse calamity than us, Malaysia is a very blessed country. We can do it, we just need to throw it out first. That's all. Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum and good evening. My question is quite simple. Why couldn't you just say about their plan on the first 40% of the Malay people? So my question is, does Pakatan Harapan is quite confident that they will get the acceptance of the people in Sabah and Sarawak? Because I know that, from what I know, that the number of parliament seats in Sabah and Sarawak is the same as the Peninsula.
Okay, thank you.
So what is their plans?
Alright. We have another one. We take that?
Hello. Okay. The decision to still have PAS in the Exco Selangor is sort of killing PKR slowly, as the analysts say. So PKR is deemed or is seen to have to be having relationships with other components, party components, but still sleeping with PAS. So since the topic is about what if by the end of the term there is still a three-corner fight, right? Would you leave it till the end, till tomorrow's the election day, or would you have plans before that?
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask a question on federalism. The reason that I bring this up is because I feel that it's going to be the backdrop of implementation if you go into government. So I feel that's important. So my question is the current power relations between the federal and the state optimum, if it's healthy? And what is it that's currently provided by the federal state that Pakatan or PKR believes that should be provided by the state with sufficiency and closer government knows best? And to sum up my question is this: is it having under Pakatan Rakyat, is it a dominant central government or a asserting state government?
Okay, thank you. We just have one more.
Yeah.
Good evening. I have a question for Wong Chen. Earlier you said that lawmakers especially should be paid reasonably well, and personally I do agree with that. In fact, that is a Singapore model as well. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong is the highest paid political leader in the world. But I have two concerns over this. Firstly, this motion has been tabled in Dewan Rakyat before, and the opposition MPs really rejected that motion outright. Secondly, Menteri Besar Tan Sri Khalid tabled a motion in Selangor, and it was passed, and Nik Nazmi was one of the beneficiaries, beside the point. And he got a good bashing for that as well. So is that your personal aspiration, or is it a party stand?
Okay, let me answer the last question first. The members of parliament actually approved the latest budget review for the members of parliament pay. The parliamentary pay is now close to 22 to 23,000 ringgit a month. It is still underpaid because most of us have to use that money to run our office. So, for instance, my office runs on 3 persons, and I'm spending 14,000 a month on that. So whatever balance you pay a bit of tax here and there, and you bring home about 6,000 or so, roughly. So you can't live on 6,000 a month as a member of parliament when you have to, every 5 years or so, you've got to contest elections. And then for us who are in the state government that is controlled by Pakatan Harapan, it is the state support us a bit by giving us 250,000 a year to serve the community. So when community members walk in, we can use some money to pay and to give them. For those who are outside, they are on their own. They're even worse. So for some of my colleagues in Kedah, where they are on their own, they have 1 staff only. They can't afford to have 3 staff. So money as a function is important for us to hire enough staff and pay them reasonably well, so that you can have good staff to do proper research so that we can perform in Parliament. So the pay, you cannot pay like the Singaporean model that is way too high. What I'm saying is you just have to ask how much is it to have a reasonably middle class or upper middle class lifestyle, right? And then work backwards and find that number. I think that number is close to 500,000 a year, you know, because if they spend 200,000 on their office, they still have 300,000, about 30,000 a month, which is about 70% of the CEO pay. Okay. Now the issue regarding federalism. This actually answers to Sabah Sarawak issue as well as the general issue of federalism. Are we going to see a dominant federal government? I think we'll be seeing a direction where we will share more power with the states. In particular, the poor states, which are facing this resource curse, where they have a lot of oil but very poor, you know, like Terengganu, Sabah, Sarawak. All those kind of things have to be readdressed by giving them the power to tax or to retain some taxation, some element of taxation back to them. So for Sabah and Sarawak, we're looking at, as a policy back in 2013 election, we're looking at 20% royalty share of the oil royalties. The formula is not carved in stone, you know, it's flexible. But essentially, we know that the poorer states need to come up faster. Yeah? Therefore, we should reallocate more money to them, either from the federal level or allow them to retain taxes deriving from those states. For instance, let's say Kedah has contributes 2 billion a year to national income by way of taxation. We should consider giving Kedah maybe 20% of that to be retained back, so they at least have 400 million a year to pursue their infrastructure projects on their own. So that would be the federal state position. I mean, because basically I'm in charge of economic issues. So I would look at all economic issues about money. So if you don't have money, you can run the state. So I think a fairer system should go towards that direction. I don't believe in having separate state police, separate judiciary, that kind of thing. No, not really. Religion is too small for that. Okay. On Selangor, I think Nick should answer that. And on that's it, right? Okay.
Okay, I think to answer the question on Selangor, the position of PAS in Selangor. First of all, the situation of a state government is based on the confidence of the majority of legislators. So the majority of legislators, and here it includes PAS in Selangor, give their confidence to Datuk Sri Azmin to serve as Menteri Besar. So they are part of the state government, including with Pakatan Harapan, Amanah, KEADILAN, and DAP. And it's not something that is unusual when you see that yes, PAS is not part of the federal opposition coalition, but in Selangor they are a member. We've seen before, for example, PBDS in Sarawak. They were federal member of BN, but they are a state opposition party. And in UK, you have situations where the Lib Dems and the Tories or the Labour Party at the local council level, they may form coalitions, but at the federal level they do not form coalitions between the different parties. So on that sense, I don't see that there's any major difference on that because Selangor is just basically maintaining the status quo of the state government. As for the pay increases now, I just would like to touch on the Selangor part. I think that the main issue was that, and for many of us, was because there was no consultation. The quantum of it was quite large. A, and B was there was no consultation. Unlike in Parliament, when the federal government increased the pay, there was consultation between the opposition, between the government backbenchers, the Speaker's office, and the ministry. But when Tan Sri Khalid increased the pay in Selangor, everyone was caught by surprise. I was presiding the session as Deputy Speaker, and he announced the increase of my pay. I had no news whatsoever before that. Suddenly there was this huge jump in my pay, which I did not know about. And I think that was the main issue, that we felt that we could not defend that huge pay increase because there was no prior consultation. And there's still an increase, but we cut the amount of increase and it has been reduced under the current administration.
I'll try to answer 3 questions very quickly. Sabah Sarawak votes. Borneo, Sabah Sarawak has actually 26 seats in Sabah, including Labuan, plus 31 in Sarawak. So it's 57 out of 222. So actually, the government is more or less still decided by Peninsula, as good as that. I think it's going to be very difficult for us to make inroads into Sarawak. Let's start it. And well, Andrew is watching. Some Sarawakians just, I don't know, they think and look at things quite differently, And it's very unique. So I think Sarawak parliamentary seats to break that 31 is quite a challenge. If we can maintain the 5 that we have now, it's actually quite good. But Sabah is an open field. In fact, in the last general election, actually we have 4 parliamentary seats in Sabah, Pakatan Harapan, PKR 1 and DAP 3. Actually, PKR could have won another 4 if not for multi-corner fights, because 4 seats, for example, I think Kota Marudu, Pensiangan, Keningau, and the other one is Ranau, I think. These are the seats where actually the votes for BN actually is lower than total combined votes. In the case of Kota Marudu, it's by far very low, 3,000 much lower. But in Kota Marudu, there were like 8 candidates, so it was all split. So we had to, of course, fix that, and we had to find some common ground with the local Sabah parties and so on. But Sabah is actually very potential, especially with the fallout and the sacking of Shafi Abdal, because he's like the warlord of the east coast of Sabah. And under his territory, there are 7 parliamentary seats. Sempurna, Kinabatangan, Lahad Datu, Libaran, I remember a few more. So, and because Sabah has had a history of changing government 3 or 4 times, changing government is actually quite normal for them. So, even in the last general election, we could have hit about 8 parliamentary seats. I think now we may hit 10 or 12. So, that 10 or 12 in Sabah is enough to form a government if we keep this momentum in Semenanjung, because the next general election will be decided more or less by 3 states, Sabah, Johor and Perak. Because Johor has 10 parliamentary seats which were won by BN either below 2,000 or 5% margin. 8 of these seats are PKR seats. These are mostly multiracial seats. Chances are with Muhyiddin sacking, with the GST and so on, I think you can expect 9, I think realistic that 9 seats in Johor to fall. And the next one is Perak, because Perak has 26. And there are at least about 7 or 8 marginal seats which were lost below 2,000 in the last general election. So with everything that happened, I think it's very real that all the seats in the 3 key states, swing states, will deliver Putrajaya to Pakatan Harapan, provided, and therefore I come to the next question, provided we get around this PAS question. Because the only one card now is PAS. And it's very difficult to read where PAS is going now, and I think there is another internal turmoil within PAS, because there's one group that seems to be more friendly to UMNO, and this doctrine about Malay must be empowered to secure Islam is gaining ground. But of course, there is another group that feels that, there is a betrayal of past and so on. I think they are going through that process all over again. There is no clarity where they are going. But that's why Pakatan Harapan cannot wait for that clarity to come. We have to pitch our deal and our promise and our offer to the electorates directly, because as I said just now, we have full confidence of the intelligence and maturity of the voters. They know what to do. You just have to treat them with dignity and be clear about what you will do. And I think they will decide. So actually, once I think you begin the process of making very clear where we will be or what kind of government we will offer, PAS slowly has to grapple with that reality, because then the national discourse is about what we will be compared to the status quo of Najib and UMNO. And PAS cannot be neither here nor there all the time. There can only be two possibilities. Either they decide to go with PN or some electoral pact or something with UMNO, or they come to terms with us and they enter into a one-to-one electoral pact with Pakatan Harapan. But they cannot leave it hanging to the last minute. It's actually to their detriment. It's not to Pakatan's detriment. So in that sense, I think we just have to push forward, and I think the business of any opposition party or any political party is to win seats. They are pragmatic enough to know if they continue not knowing where they will head, more and more fan-seekers Malays will swing to Pakatan. And they will be left with that 20% hardcore PAS supporters. And that number is coming. Is this a question of speed? So I think I can't tell when they will decide. It's not in my position to influence that. What we can do at Pakatan, we can push forward the policy platform, the clarity about where we want to be, and we can present a credible, cohesive and united opposition as an alternative to PN. And PAS has to choose. It's the PAS that will do the choosing, not Pakatan. And the last question on federalism. I spent a lot of time academically looking at federalism, because I was planning to do PhD on federalism and decentralization, which got suspended now because it's too close to election. But I think you have to decide first how extensive is federalism that you want to go. Obviously, the current setup is not fair, because the federal obligation financially to the state is only two. One is per capita grant, they call it capitation grant. That is RM5.40 seorang. So in Selangor we have about 3 million plus, so we get, you kira lah, RM5.40, 3 million plus. The other federal grant, which is by law obligated, is the Maris grant, which is the grant to maintain roads. The rest, the federal is not obligated to give any assistance or sharing of revenue, when almost 95% of the revenue or tax collection is collected by federal. But this is where I think you cannot be dogmatic about it. You have to be practical, pragmatic, because a debate on decentralization from a centrally driven federal government that you have now can take into many forms. I can share with you, for example, on one corner you have the strong proponent of major decentralization, which is Chin Tong. Liu Chin Tong thinks that the local government, local needs know better how to run their town, so devolve to the town. Of course, the other extreme people who think maintain it, because the concern is, if you don't fix corruption and the right people before you decentralize, what you will do when you decentralize, you create these little warlords who become more corrupt than what we used to have in Putrajaya. Now instead of 1 Putrajaya, you have 10 Putrajaya. You have to contend with. So that's argument. And you know, because academically, I spent some time in researching on decentralization and so on. It's a complex process because even, for example, you decide to go ahead with decentralization and you draw up at least a basic services and functions that you want to decentralize. Because of the development in Malaysia is so uneven, you cannot do it across the country. So it's like, while you may be able to decentralize in Subang Jaya, and so Subang will be able to provide health, education, and so on, I don't think you can do that in Baling, seriously. They just don't have the capacity to do it. So then it becomes a bit tricky. Then are you going to have a dual system where only the towns will have decentralization, the rural does not have? Then it's quite complicated. And then the next level, that's fiscal decentralization. You know, you decide how much money you want to give to the local government for them to run their services. Then you go to the next one, which is revenue decentralization. You allow the local government to raise taxes on their own. Well, again, you can do it perhaps in Penang, you can do it in Selangor or maybe Johor, but you can't do it in Kelantan because there's just not enough economic activities to generate that kind of tax revenue for the local government. So there is this complexity because of the uneven development throughout the country that I have always, I'm like the middle pragmatic, and I think that when it comes to decentralization, we have to take it step by step, and we should not rush into it. It should not be the main priority. What you should do is resolve all these issues that we talked before, the structural, the corruption, the economic growth, and most importantly, the education. Because once you fix that and you can put in place a more even development, then I think you can go to the stage where you may be thinking about decentralization. Otherwise, it's just political rhetoric which will fail eventually, like what you have in some local councils in the UK. There are just some local councils that just will be insolvent years after years because they just don't have enough revenue to fund. And the central government always have to bail them out time after time. So because of that, I don't think federalism and decentralization will go to the extent of devolving some of the key services yet, because I think you have to do some other more important reforms first, maybe later. Thank you. I think they are more tired than us. There's a question at the back. Yep.
My question is to any of you there. You know there's been a brain drain from Malaysia. Very intelligent Malaysians, irrespective race, Malays, Chinese, and Indians, for that country. The government has tried everything to bring them back. Will you make it a bit more attractive? Will you make it a bit more attractive when you come to power and reissue passports to about 50,000 Malaysians who have left because of greener pastures, but they would like to return to Malaysia? Will you consider that? And one more question to any of you. When you come to power, will you have the KL Mayor re-elected or nominated? Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, I do. This is for Wadi Rafizi. Just now you said you blame people like us were the reason why we are where we are. Firstly, what do you mean? Secondly, what kind of mentality should we have to change the society?
Take one more.
My name is Azmi. So I'll try to make it simple. It's a bit of a complicated question. So basically, you mentioned federalism, you mentioned about electoral pact, etc. So we know that during the launch of the Pakatan Harapan, a few parties, for example in Sabah and Sarawak, raised the question of they were not properly consulted or were they invited, etc. Which I totally understand why, because you must start from somewhere and further terms can be negotiated later, etc. But politics being politics, now you're faced with that mess. So what would be, I'm sure there's some negotiation happening in the background, but then to the extent that we can share tonight, what would be the step that you will take to make sure that with respect to Sabah and Sarawak, there will be an electoral pact that extended as a one-on-one fight. And in saying so, will there be, if you envision so lah, Pakatan kena alam, Pakatan kena baju, or something which is not Pakatan Harapan but still electoral pact? Because I'm borrowing idea from Zaire, which is supposed to be an post PR kind of idea that he has. Thank you very much.
I'll let Ralph answer the Sabah Sarawak issue. Brain drain, yeah, sure, you can have a new passport, don't worry. No, it's important that we encourage as many Malaysians to come back, or former Malaysians. Shouldn't be a penalty for that. I know some of you who are here permanently or working here for the last 10, 20 years, 30 years. You do it out of either economic or socio-political reasons. So we promise, if we rule, that we'll be much more open and we'll be much more welcoming for Malaysians to return. I always believe that you should have every right to work anywhere you want, yeah? But you should always come back. You should always come back with your knowledge and your skills and try to help rebuild this country. So on the KL Mayor issue, yes, Pakatan Harapan is now seriously considering the issue about local government elections. We will come to a conclusion quite soon, but there is a lot of desire within Pakatan Harapan to see local council election happen. It's better. We used to worry about it a lot because every election causes problems, and every election costs money. Is something that we always struggle with. So from a practical point of view, we've put off that issue for quite some time, but I think now Pakatan Harapan is pushing forward to see how to conduct local elections better. For this, our mayor posts and all the local council. But mayor is not so easy unless we rule the country, because the mayor is by law, by Malaysian law, appointed by the federal. It can be seconded by us and so forth, but it's an appointment. It's not an election. Yeah?
Let me answer the easy ones first, which is the Sabah Sarawak Electoral Pact. It's important to bring back a credible and cohesive opposition pact as soon as possible last year. And the best way to do that is to take the three parties which agree on almost everything. And that's why you have, as you say, you have to start somewhere and you have to build the credibility first, then you talk to other parties which are ongoing now. And of course, the requirements is very clear. It's actually not a convenient political grouping. You must subscribe to the policies as well as the commitments that we sign to each other, which is a very high, big commitments that some parties may not do it. Now, Sabah and Sarawak, as always, the political scenario is quite different from the national scenario. For a start, most so far, from my interaction and experience, actually they don't want to go to national politics. So actually it's pointless for them to join a national coalition because they don't want to be a national party. They just want to be a regional, local party. So because of that, I think it's definitely a question of electoral pact one-to-one, which is, as I say, is ongoing and the permutation is endless. Perhaps the only thing that we will do much better now compared to the last general election, I think there must be a lot more openness and magnanimity on the part of Pakatan Harapan to accommodate the smaller parties in Sabah. Not Sarawak, Sabah. Because obviously if you compare their strength to the national party, it's quite difficult for you to match, for them to match us. But in order to avoid the 8 corner, 7 corner, and if giving 1 or 2 seats to them will allow us to have a 1-to-1 fight, then I think we should explore that. On the condition, and this is the difficult one, those local parties as well must be realistic and also must put the interest of the public first, not because they want easy ride. Because negotiations in the past always break down because the conditions is ridiculous, for the lack of a better word. Usually the local parties will say, we want to stand in all the state seats. You can only confine yourself to federal seats. Or we want 2/3 of the seats, you get 1/3. It doesn't work because, you know, we have the reason why we have to accommodate them is so that they don't split votes. The majority of the votes is with Pakatan. So it takes 2 to tango, and I think hopefully we have a lot more maturity among the leadership, both sides now, to put the interest of the public first. You know, be realistic. And I think when both sides are realistic, then we are able to strike electoral pact in Sabah. In the case of Sarawak, I think the Sarawak BN parties will swing to whichever coalition that wins the general election. So if we win, the whole BN Sarawak will cross over. So if BN maintains, they maintain BN. Actually, even Najib knows that. So that's why, and as I say, that's why the 3 swing states doesn't include Sarawak. It's actually Sabah, Johor, and Perak. And if you manage to get enough seats from these 3 states, and that's why the 1-to-1 in Sabah is more important than, for example, Sarawak, because then they have to negotiate with us, not the other way around. And the last one is middle class. You see, I think most of the time, I think our middle class across the board have this very condescending view that while they look down on anyone who's running something because they feel they could do better and they are more educated and so on, yeah, at the same time, they don't want to take the responsibility and to go and fix it. And that has perpetuated the BN government for so long. And what frustrates me even more is that even when a lot of people actually put aside everything and dedicated our efforts to build a credible 2-party system, instead of asking what can I do to help, you have the chattering classes who prefer to just run down everyone because you can. Because you are in your comfort, because internet is all over the place, you can spend one whole day just making comments in PMI or Malaysia Kini or anywhere. I don't mind if that is being done by orang kampung or working class because understandable. But with your privilege and your resources, I would expect some recognition that you owe it to society to do something. And we, as a society, we suffered for years precisely because middle class wants to have a cake and eat it too. You want to have a good government, but you don't want to lose your big bungalows. It doesn't work like that. So that's why, unless you have more and more people saying that I will find ways, one way or another, to make a difference. You don't have to leave your jobs like Wong Chen and myself did. You don't even have to do that. But find ways to be constructive and understand that you are part and parcel of that struggle, not a bystander whose hobby is just to throw punches. Doesn't work. So that's why I think, I hope the younger ones understand you cannot have this very condescending attitude that you run down all politicians. You think politics is bad, but you don't have the guts to do it yourself. How can we attract good people when the middle class and educated refuse to dirty your hands? Obviously, that we attract the, Ibrahim Ali and the likes. People understand. In fact, the only major reason why, some of us, myself, made that decision to quit my job and do this full time is because no matter how far you reach in your corporate world, in your comfort, it keeps coming back to me what Plato always said, that the price that you pay when you refuse to participate in governing is that we will be governed by our inferiors. And that has been happening for the last 20 years. And now that phenomenon becomes a national joke. You laugh at the ministers, that line like kalau cerdik bukan menteri. It's very popular. Why? Because the middle class refuse to play your role. Thank you very much.
What we do is that each of them will give 1.5 to 2 minutes concluding remark, and then we would have to actually clear this building very soon. So if that's possible.
Okay, what kind of concluding remark? I'm glad to be back again. I was here the last time I was in UK about 10 years ago. It's good to see a big crowd. I was expecting like maybe 50. And you guys are pretty serious, so I'm not very sure what exactly to tell you, but I think the message I want to send to you all is that we're quite competent in what we do. This is a new generation of politicians. We won't give you the spill, we won't tell you the stump speech. We can do that also. But this is the London crowd, right? I mean, you guys are smarter than the average. So I want you to take home that message that we are data-driven. We are also driven by policy ideas, and that we hope to rule very soon, and that we hope to run these policies with your help, coming back to Malaysia and for the young people, and try to rebuild back a better nation for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll just add something very short to what Raf has said just now. I think the Malaysian diaspora, the Malaysian students here are all very privileged, and we hope that you can play one role or another in making Malaysia a better place. So that's the hope today, that I don't think you just come here for the talk, and it's a huge crowd. It's the first time that I see this crowd in London. I've come to London so many times, and before as a student as well. But to see so many of you here today gives me much hope that I'll see a lot of you in making a difference in Malaysia. Thank you.
I have to be brief as well. I suppose if there is one takeaway that I hope you can bring back and reflect, is that do not underestimate what you can do individually and as a group. The problem with us, and I spent 9 years in the UK, from A-level to degree and then to working here, you are quite detached from what's happening, and therefore you really, most of the time, do not appreciate how bad things are on the ground. You have to appreciate that it's no longer political rhetorics. People are losing jobs, they are cutting food. Children, some families actually have to ration formulated milk. Things are bad, and I don't think Malaysia has ever seen this stage because our failure to keep our government in check for the last 30 years finally come to the climax now. So you have to ask yourself, because I used to be at where you are now only merely 16, 17 years ago. And within a space of 10 years, I think we came full force into politics. We decided to go and leave everything and just dedicate to politics. I would like to think, actually, we did make some major differences in the last 5 years. So, when you sit in your chair and you go back, do not underestimate what you can do should you decide to act on all your complaints and on your worries and so on. Complaining and worrying is not going to change anything. You will just be sucked into a system and you will also pay the price eventually. So I hope if you reflect that, and if out of this session we have 10 or 15 people who go back and decide to make a difference, whichever party you decide to go, then I think we have a good future. Thank you very much.
Alright, that concludes the session today. So just a reminder that when you go out, you could use the stairs so we could avoid the bottleneck and people could move on along faster. You could meet the MPs downstairs. They will be downstairs.